Okay, so I hope we're live now. Um, I'm Angela Boord. Um, and first time I've read live, so I'm not exactly sure um, what how to like do all this stuff, but here we go. I'm Angela Boord, and I am the author of Fortune's Fool. Which is a current finalist in SPFBO, the Self-Published Fantasy Blog Off. It is an epic fantasy, historical fantasy, and it's my debut novel. Um, so I am not going to read from that today, though. I'm going to read from a shorter novel called Smuggler's Fortune, which is available through my newsletter with a newsletter subscription right now for free until the end of May, when hopefully in the next couple months it's actually going to be released on Amazon with a nice cover by John Anthony Giovanni, just like Fortune's Fool. And it is about Kira, the protagonist of Fortune's Fool. And Fortune's Fool has two narratives. There's a past narrative of Kira's life, and then there's a present story that's happening in the present. And this novel, which started out as a short story and kind of grew from there, it's short though, it's a lot shorter than Fortune's Fool. It kind of happens in the middle between that past narrative and the present narrative. So anyways, here we go. It's Smuggler's Fortune, and okay, so chapter 1. A week after I returned to Liera, after the wars had ended, a group of men tried to cut off my right arm in a back alley. The market on the Talos for sellswords was hard since peace had been declared, and I probably should have been more careful keeping my right arm covered. People tend to notice an arm made of metal, but my sleeve snagged on a pike standing by one of the trading tables where I was applying for a job guarding a wine shipment for a minor house, and ripped before I could free it. With all the milling groups of unemployed Guevaros, it was no wonder the wrong sort of men noticed and followed me into the back alley, hoping to score a chunk of silver off a skinny new recruit with a thicket of curly yellow hair like a northern farmer. Never mind, I was really a woman with 5 years of wartime experience. In my male garb, I looked like a green recruit. If you want coin, I haven't got any, I said, showing them my empty gloved hands. I had no luck today. I think you've got something more than a purse up that sleeve, don't you? The man in front said. I took quick stock of the situation. 4 Guevaros blocked the entrance to the alley, and 3 of them drifted around behind me, blocking the exit. They wore no armbands, so they were probably just as desperate as I was. Unlike me, they stood a good chance of being hired on looks alone. In these tight times, householders would rather have big men with scars on their faces, the marks of experience. If anyone should turn to thievery, it was me, not them. I settled back on my heels and put my hands on my hilts. And what if I do have something up my sleeve? I said. I don't think it's doing you any good. The captain spat something greenish on the ground in front of him, then ran his tongue over his teeth. He was missing a tooth, and his faint Vensalan accent swished through the gap. His nose was bent like he'd taken a heavy blow to the face. Vensalan Guevaros had a reputation for ruthlessness, and this one looked like he was living the part. Why wouldn't my arm do me any good? Must not. That householder you interviewed with laughed in your face. You might as well let us have it, and maybe we'll spare the rest of you. You don't think I'm partial to my arm? You're more partial to your head, yes? Take off the arm, boy. Throw it on the ground. No. Guess we'll just have to cut it off you then. Blades hissed as we all drew steel. I backpedaled, trying to put myself up against a wall instead of 3 heavily armed Guevaros. The man closest to me lunged forward with a knife. I caught the movement in the corner of my eye and sliced my sword into his shoulder. The blade passed most of the way through the joint before it stuck, and he roared in pain as I jerked it out of his flesh. I kicked him, still screaming, onto the dusty ground of the alley. After that, the fight was a lot of whirling, clanging metal, grunting, yelling, and blood, until a fist came out of nowhere and slammed into the side of my face. I hit the brick wall hard and dropped my sword. A man came at me with a short sword, and I smashed him in the jaw with my right arm. Hands grabbed me and shoved me back against the wall, holding me there off my feet. I cursed, struggling, and the captain approached me with his big knife out. I guess I got a blow in on him because he spit blood and wiped it on his sleeve before he spoke. This is on your own head, boy. I did give you the choice. Look, I said, I'm sure we can come to an agreement. A rush of air whistled down the alley, followed by a solid thump. One of the men, still standing behind the captain, cried out and fell to his knees, a crossbow bolt jutting from his back. Before the others could turn around, another bolt flew down the alley and caught a man in the shoulder. Then one of the men holding on to me loosed his grip and fell forward. A blade quivered hilt deep in the back of his neck. Because the knife plugged the wound, all the blood welled up out of his mouth as he collapsed onto his knees. Damn, someone yelled, the watch. I ripped free of the man who held me and slammed my right fist into the captain's face. He staggered backward, but before I could pick up my sword, he and his remaining men stumbled off down the alley. I touched my cheek to make sure all the bones were still intact. It was tender, but it didn't feel like anything was broken. The skin above my brow had split, though, and blood leaked into my eye. My thanks, I said, still breathing hard, expecting to see the watch at the entrance to the alley and thinking furiously about what story I could give them. I wasn't in the wrong here, but I didn't want to invite attention from the watch either. So much for lying low. But instead of the watch, only two men stood there, a tall Calfin dressed in fighting robes, and next to him, a Tyresian wearing a battered leather vest, a mass of heavy black braids tied off at the nape of his neck. He was lowering a crossbow. I wiped my eye, trying to get a better look at them. Did I hear them threatening to steal your arm? The Tyresian said in a gravelly and surprisingly familiar voice. It sounded like a voice I'd often heard back in the barracks in Rhine on my first job as a sellsword, when I had yet to find out if I could really fight. A long time ago, when I'd been scared and alone. I squinted to see better. Damn, those braids and that crossbow. Maybe it was him. Nevis, I said. A big grin creased his craggy features, the same color as the amber Tyresian desert from which he hailed. Karis, when I heard them talking about an arm, I wondered if it was you. He looked down at the dead men in the alley. There were 5 of them total. The 3 that Nevis and his friend killed also bore injuries from my arm and my sword. Still got your talent for trouble, I see, he said. I stepped over a body to take his outstretched hand and grinned. Hard to give up something you're good at. I thought you were going home, I said to Nevis, after I followed him and his Calfin friend off the Talos and down to the docks, to a tavern they frequented and called the Lady and Vine. We sat at a table in the corner near the window. It was a hot day, and the shutters were wide open, allowing the briny smell and coolness of the sea into the shady interior. The barmaid brought us a pitcher of wine and a plate of prawns and oysters. The side of my face was starting to swell, and it hurt to chew, but the juicy prawns were worth the pain. I had been a long time in the mountains, and then on ship with nothing to eat but ship biscuits and salt pork. I thought when your contract came up, you'd had enough of hiring yourself out, I said. I'd had enough snow, Nevis answered, freeing an oyster from its shell with the point of his knife. Enough cold, and enough of that Rizorniki court. What a nest of vipers. So you traded it for Liera? That's like giving it one kind of snake for another. You just traded a cobra for an adder. My sister wrote me before I left Rizornik that she thought a thief was skimming off the pay I sent home. She's trying to outfit my nephew to be a tomb guard. It takes a lot of coin to climb those ranks. To guard a tomb? Nemis's Calfin friend said in confusion. He had a melodious voice, muffled slightly by the urka, and spoke clear and with a slight Calfin accent. Shouldn't he be getting hazard pay, trying to keep the ghosts inside? Nevis shook his head and rolled his eyes as if he were used to his friend's ignorant jokes. Razi, he said, it's not a tomb, it's the tomb of the sacrifices in Taru. Karis, you must have studied history with that fancy noble background of yours. The history of trade agreements and wars between the Tyresian people and our own, I quoted from one of my textbooks. How the Tyresian Queen Alisar, the Alisar, Nevis corrected. It's a title, get it right. I'm just telling you what I studied. I didn't say it was accurate. How the Tyresian Queen Alisar fell in love with the Eterian Emperor Atraska, was thereby doomed by the jealous goddess Grua, who then demanded 1,000 sacrifices to save her land. Oh, I said, that's the tomb, is it? Yes, each sacrifice has its own guard. My sister is putting forward my nephew for the next available spot, but it requires a lot of coin to compete. I'd wanted to Two myself when I was younger, but my grandmother, she was our mayor then, may the goddess have mercy on her soul, but now it's my aunt, told me I didn't have the talent for it, put me up for the Alisar's army instead. Nevis shrugged, a brief movement of his broad shoulders, a little like boulders moving, I'd always thought. It was a good commission while it lasted, but hiring out is better for coin if some son of a dog doesn't rob you blind before the money makes it home. Why did you stop in Liera, though? They were fighting a war, weren't they? Lots of jobs for anyone who wanted one. And I couldn't go home before I ran down the son of a bitch who was stealing from me. I found him holed up in a casing den down in the Kinless Quarter, spending all my money on smoke. Did you get your money back? Let's just say he won't be cheating me anymore. I picked up a job with the Emisi to make up the difference. You still need more coin to leave? Nevis looked embarrassed as he slurped the oyster out of its shell. His Kelfin friend, Rozzy, I thought he'd call him, chuckled. I had expected him to pull his urka down by now, the way Kelfins did when they were being casual. But he still wore it wrapped around his face, which was strange. All I could see were his eyes, the way they crinkled beneath his dark brows. They were sienna brown, rimmed with a faint edge of gold. Kelfin winked. He's still sending half his coin home, Kiris, but he spends the rest as fast as he earns it. Fancy beads for his hair and Lier and courtesans. Nevis glared at him, his hand going through his braids as if in defense. He squinted at Nevis. He wore a dozen or more braids, as most Triresians did, threaded with even more beads of clay, glass, and metal. I had only seen him take his hair down after battles. Then he'd wash and rebraid it and thread it with any new beads. It took hours, and it was obviously an exercise in patience and concentration for Nevis with his massive hands. But Tiresians regarded their beads as a record of their life. Each one had its own meaning to the person who wore it, and when the person died, their beads would be inlaid in the lid of their tomb. It did seem that he'd acquired a number of new beads since I'd seen him last, but what that meant was anyone's guess. Beads weren't straightforward histories. They're not for decoration, Nevis growled at Rozzy. Right, his friend said, and leaned back in his seat, folding his arms over his chest. That blue spun glass bead had nothing to do with that little red-haired girl upstairs. Shut up, Rozzy. Nevis grabbed his cup and drank, but beneath his weathered brown skin there was a dark flush, like he was blushing. I laughed, picked up another prawn, and Rozzy chuckled. That red-haired girl took all his money. He's still sore. Nevis picked up another oyster. It's not true, Rozzy. Not entirely. I fumbled with the prawn, trying to pull apart the shell using only my left hand. I could smash it with my right, but then I'd have nothing but shellfish paste. Nevis, I said, didn't the same thing happen to you in Rajornik? That was different. She wasn't a courtesan. Her father uprooted her when he learned she was seeing a Gavaro. She didn't mean to take my money. So she said, but it always seemed very convenient to me. Fool me twice, Rozzy said with equanimity. Nevis gave him a sour look, but Rozzy only looked like he was smiling wider. I finally liberated the prawn and popped it in my mouth, only to wince when I tried to chew. Nevis's expression lost some of its irritation. We should take you to Vods and Alea. I swallowed. Who are they? Why should I go? Alea will patch you up. Vods is Rajornicki. He'll want your news. Not much to give him. The Grand Prince is trying to make a stand against the Caval long distance. In retaliation, the Caval have been executing any Rajornicki boyar or army officer they can find. It's a bad time to be associated with Rajornik. Heard anything from the company? I shook my head. Not really. Didn't feel like being ordered to kill them for the Caval. Heard the wars were over, so I came back here. You're Lieren? The Colfin said, his tone turning sharper. Which house? Cap Rhine, I lied. I had been born to House Aliente as Kira, but since coming back to Lier, I discovered that admitting you were Aliente was as good as a death sentence. Anyway, I hadn't been allowed to use my real house name for a long time. Don't tell me you're both working for the Prinz, I said. Prinz and Caprine had signed a truce recently, but relations between the two houses was as tense as it had always been, if not more, given that they had recently been killing each other. We're not working for anyone right now, Nevis said, tipping his glass up. Been nearly a month, Rozzy added, then sighed theatrically. It's getting a little boring, hanging around in bars, drinking and smoking, visiting the courtesans upstairs. What we need is to risk our lives for a wagon full of beans again. No, it wasn't my fault that farmer turned out to be carting casein out of the city. If he'd told me, I would have been prepared. We would have gotten past those Prinz Gavaros. Good thing you had me with you, Archer, or you'd be wearing a jerkin of daggers. Razi was playing with the same knife he'd thrown at the man in the alley, twirling it between his fingers. It was a Calfit throwing knife, slim bladed and wicked, probably perfectly balanced. It wouldn't have come cheap, and I wondered how he'd afforded it. But Nevis just snorted. Good thing they were on the take, too, you mean? We got lucky. It could have been actual guardsmen enforcing the trading laws. If you two are going to keep arguing, you could at least spare the wine, I said, motioning at the pitcher. I'd gladly take a job guarding a farmer's cart, no matter what he was carrying. You're too pretty for the Talos, Razi said in a neutral voice, darting me a glance. No one will want to hire you with a face like that. Paused for a moment, caught off guard. Did he suspect I was a woman? I couldn't tell if he was flirting with me or accusing me. I poured my glass full up to the rim and tried not to look like I was paying him any attention. Well, that hit I took today might leave a scar, I said morosely. Anyway, there's not a lot I can do about it. I can tell the captains I've got 5 years of experience, but no one believes me. So why exactly did that company want to steal your arm? It's made of metal, Nevis said. Not so loud, I warned him in a low voice. Razi's eyebrows lifted until they were hidden in the folds of his urka. You lost an arm in the fighting? Before I went north. Why didn't you just give it to them then? Isn't a metal arm heavy? It's not the kind of fake arm you're thinking of, Razi, Nevis said before I could answer. It's magic forged. Magic forged, Razi said in amazement. It's part of me, I answered reluctantly. He would have had to cut it off. You aren't one of those magicians from Arif's temple, are you? No, I said, maybe too quickly. Arif was the god of knowledge and magic. He was also the patron of the House de Prince, and I preferred to avoid them both. I didn't make my own arm. A man named Arsino had made it before he'd sent me out of Liera in this disguise, hoping to keep me safe from householder plots. He was the reason I'd come back, the only reason. Thinking about Arsino set up a deep ache inside me the way it always did. I had expected it to diminish after 5 years, but it had only grown worse, especially now that I'd returned home to look for him. I was terrified that with every corner I turned, every alley I walked down, I would find that he truly was dead, the way people said he was. All these years, the thought of building a life together with him when the war was over had been the only thing that kept me going. I didn't want to believe he was dead. I couldn't believe it. But Razi didn't seem to notice my discomfort. Never met a magician, he said. I'd prefer to keep it that way, Nevis said. No offense, Kiris. I murmured something noncommittal and was just reaching for the pitcher to pour myself a third glass of wine when a man at the table beside us pushed his chair out with a screech. We all looked up. I couldn't help overhearing that you're out of work, he said. I don't see any armbands. He flicked his gaze down to my right arm, and I wondered what else he had overheard. I fought to keep myself from scowling. He looked like he was from Cyan, with his black eyes and his straight black hair hanging in a long single plait down his back, nearly to his waist. Cyan was a world away, but a few traders had made their way to Liera. Though most wore their traditional silk robes, this man wore Lieran clothes, a linen shirt open at the throat, and a red silk tunic embroidered with fantastic birds in yellow thread. He wasn't as tall as Razi, but probably taller than Nevis, hard to tell when we were sitting, and his light olive skin was just a shade darker than mine. A worn black hilt wrapped in ragged blue silk jutted out of a scabbard at his hip. It was the kind of weapon that looked like it had seen use. You heard right, I said carefully. Why? As it happens, he said, I am out of employees. If you're better with a sword than your injuries seem to suggest, perhaps we can come to an agreement. I'm a merchant from Anjou. My name is Lisang. Although I don't expect any of you to recognize the name, the Li family is well known and respected in Anjou. I'm moving a small but valuable cargo out of the city to a villa in the hills. It must be transported in a timely manner, and no one must open the chest. If you can't keep secrets, I'll leave right now. But if you can keep a secret, you'll be rewarded for it. Rewarded how? I asked. 10 astra for a 7 days' work. Each? Razi asked. Each. That's not bad pay, Nevis said. If it's as simple as you make it sound, why are you having trouble finding men? The man gave us all a level stare. I'd prefer to keep this cargo away from the authorities, too. We all leaned back in our chairs. Nevis crossed his arms over his broad chest, and Razi directed his eyes to the ceiling. I tapped the tabletop with my metal fingers. So you're a smuggler, I said. Lisang stiffened. I'm an honest merchant. I barely survived pirate attacks and shipwreck to bring this cargo to Liera. Made it all the way here only to find that your circle had made new laws banning trade in certain luxury goods while I was traveling. I looked at him hard. There was only one thing he could be selling that had been banned by the Circle in the last 5 years because the Prince and their allies wanted a monopoly on it. You're a silk merchant, aren't you? He drew himself up straight and squared his shoulders. You don't need to know what you'll be carrying. You just need to protect it. He looked like he was preparing for battle. And why not if he was carrying silk? The Prince had rammed the silk laws down everyone's throat, and no one but the Prince and their allies enjoyed that. If it is silk, I said slowly, why are you moving it to a hill villa? He looked down his nose at me. If you keep asking questions, I'll be forced to hire someone else. You can't expect us to accept the work without asking some questions, Razi said. My order has rules. Li Song looked startled. Your order? You didn't recognize the Nazari robes? Your pay sounds fine, but I won't take a job that will dishonor my brothers. I thought something about him looked different. The red embroidery on the hem of his alak, maybe, or perhaps the way his robes were cut, allowing for maximum movement while keeping him entirely covered. The Nizari were the Kalfan Empire's elite fighters with a fearsome but secretive reputation. Now it made sense that he hadn't revealed his face. All Kalfans wore head robes in respect for their magnificent son. But people said the Nizari hid their faces so the men they killed couldn't identify their killers when they went down to the underworld. Then again, people also said the Nizari failed so the emperor could replace them when they died without anyone's knowledge, making their number always the same. The only certainty was that the Nizari were in high demand for jobs as Gavaros. I wondered why Razi was unemployed. Not a criminal, Li Song said. According to the Prince, you are, Nevis pointed out. You sell your loyalty for pay, Li Song said. How is it correct for you to act so righteous to me? So he's desperate. If he wasn't desperate, he would have just walked out rather than arguing with us. How much time do we have to deliver this cargo? I asked, spinning my wine glass in my hands. I told you, a 7-day. To where? It's in the northwestern hills, Li Song said in a clipped voice. He wasn't going to fall for that bait. It's a hell of a pace, isn't it? Nevis said. I rode down through those hills. The road's nothing but bandits in places now the war's destroyed the farms. Why do you think I want to hire Gavaros? Li Song said tightly. Or aren't you used to working for your pay? Nevis scowled. I leaned forward, setting my elbows on the table. All right, I said. I'm in. Okay, so that was the first chapter. And now I see, so I check the YouTube chat and see if I've got, and it looks like there's questions. Let's see. So, oh, so thank you, Bubble Fett, because I know who that is. I appreciate that. Let's see. So she asked, what's my next project? So Smugglers is going to be coming out, like I said, hopefully in the next couple months. And then I'm working on the sequel, book 2 in the Italian Empire series, which picks up really soon after the ending of Fortune's Fool. And right now it's with my editor. And then I kind of have a feeling I'm going to have to do some more big revising after that's done. I hope to get it out in like late summer, early fall, kind of that time period. And I'm also right now in between times while I'm waiting on feedback to come back. I'm working on a Portal Fantasy series, which I have. I had a giant manuscript that I'm breaking up into 2 parts, and so I'm working on making the first 2 sections of it into book 1, and then I have a book 2 that's already, in really rough manuscript form on that one, and I hope to get those out in 2021. Let's see, what inspired the setting of this series? So the setting is it was inspired by Renaissance Italy, and also I'd hoped to make it quite Mediterranean in feel. So I wanted a lot of cultures interacting together in roughly the time period of the Renaissance when things were new and people were traveling a lot and trading and, kind of bumping up against each other. So that's kind of why I have, I have North African cultures and Middle Eastern cultures and the Cyan who are kind of everything's kind of loosely based. So don't look for exact historical details, but on China, and I kind of enjoyed making the world really as large as I could anyway. Um, let's see. Oh, thank you guys. I see the other finalists here. Okay, so any date on the audiobook? Yes, the audiobook, the release date should be September 2nd, 2020. So hopefully that's still what it is. I haven't heard anything different. So September 2020, Fortune's Fool should be out in audio. And hopefully I'm going to do my own podcast of smugglers. Since it's pretty short, it's not really, kind of meant for audio itself. So hopefully I'm going to read it though in a podcast, and um, it'll be available for free that way. Um, okay, is that, I think that's all of the questions. So thanks guys for listening. Thanks everybody for listening, and all the questions and everything. And I guess that's probably it for me.